Thank you for listening to Mobility Redefined, brought to you by Modaxo. For more insights and information, please visit mobilityredefined.com. That is mobilityredefined.com. Welcome to the Mobility Redefined podcast, where we explore transformative ideas and innovative strategies shaping the future of mobility. I am Dr. Kaan Yildizgoz, and today I'm very honored to be joined by Juan Carlos Muñoz, Minister of Transport and Telecommunications of Chile. Minister Muñoz is a global thought leader in mobility, author of the influential book Bus Rapid Transit and Restructuring of Public Transport, and the champion of sustainable transport solutions. Welcome, Mr. Muñoz.
Thank you very much, Kaan. Happy to be here at this podcast and happy to be discussing all the interesting topics you're going to be raising.
Yeah, it will be a pleasure, and I'm very sure that it will be very interesting for our listeners. Under your leadership, Chile has introduced groundbreaking initiatives such as deployment of electric buses, transformative rail projects, and you are following progressive policies on sustainable mobility, and we will be discussing all these points together in our podcast. Minister, you were at COP29 in Baku. Chile reaffirmed its commitment to the carbon neutrality by 2050, leading among developing nations. How does the transport sector contribute to this vision?
Well, we are, as a large community in this world, dealing with one of the most important challenges we've ever faced, which is the threat of global warming, making this beautiful planet a place where it's difficult to live. And our scientists tells us that we should do our best to reduce those greenhouse gases. And when we see, at least in our country, in Chile, the effort we've made, we've been very successful in quite fast reduce the percentage of the matrix, the energy matrix that comes from, for electricity generation, that comes from carbon sources. So solar energy, wind energy, water, hydraulics have become a majority of the energy matrix for generating electricity. And that's a huge success. However, the transport sector has not followed the same lead. And the transport sector is, by now, the main source of carbon emissions in our country. And with very little success, in the aggregated view, at least, we have been able to reduce it almost nothing. Quite the opposite. I think our carbon emissions are still going up. And therefore, we need to take very serious actions to achieve the commitments we've made. And it's important that these are commitments that go beyond a certain government or a certain political period. These are commitments that we take from one government to the next. And the previous government said we will be carbon neutral by 2050. And we agree with this. I think it's a big challenge, even though I also agree that we cannot wait more. And in terms of transport, there's a lot of specific targets that we have to meet. One of them is that by 2035, so 10 more years, every new vehicle entering in the country should be zero emissions. And by 2040, all our bus fleet should be zero emissions. And those are very important commitments that we're working for. And we think that given the global agenda, the scope of the challenge, every country should start getting this kind of commitments so that the NDCs, this national determined contribution of each country, should consider very specific goals regarding the transport sector. And also, we think that the COP30 that will be in Brazil by the end of the next year should have some text associated to the path that the transport sector should follow in the agreement by the end of the conference. And that, of course, is very important, but at the same time we understand it's difficult for some of the countries to commit, but we understand, as we understand it, we have no choice. We really need to reduce the emissions coming from the transport sector, no matter which country comes from.
Minister Muñoz, you mentioned about the target of electrification of the buses by 2040. Chile is already having the second largest electric bus fleet in the world. Could you share with us some key milestones achieved so far regarding your electrification journey for the buses?
This is something we're very proud of. We are not the largest. Santiago is not the largest city in the world, but it's not the richest city in the world. And still we've managed to renew an important part of our bus fleet towards electrical buses, which puts Santiago as the city in the non-Chinese world with the largest electric bus fleet. So you won't find a city in Europe, North America, in Japan or Australia or in South America with more electric buses than Santiago. Our bus fleet is around 6,500 buses, and already 2,500 of them are electric. And we have just signed contracts in our last bidding process that will allow us to add, we think, within 18 more months, approximately 2,000 more. And the big challenge here is to look beyond Santiago and what happens with the rest of the country. Chile is a very centralized, it's a very urban and a very centralized country. So Santiago, as our capital, has most of our population, like 8 million inhabitants out of a country of 19. And we're now trying to close the gap, the quality gap of public transport in Santiago with the rest of the country. And in the case of Santiago, we not only have the electric buses, we also have a wonderful 150-kilometer underground metro network, which is the backbone of the public transport system in Santiago, and which we Santiaguinos feel very proud of it. It moves around 2.3 million passengers every day and growing, and we hope that it will keep growing. We have plans to expand it by 75 more kilometers within 1 decade. Now, in the rest of the country, we are making bold moves towards bringing electric buses. And it's very nice here to mention something that I think is very important, is that electric buses not only provide decarbonization, but electric buses come with a lot of additional elements that should be very relevant for citizens and also for authorities. An electric bus, at least the ones we're bringing, are coming with air conditioning, which in the north of Chile is key, are coming with USB for charging your cell phones. And some people say what I like most about my electric bus is that I can charge my phone while I go to work. Or it can also come with Wi-Fi, flat floor. It allows people with disabilities to board and alight the buses quite effectively. And that's also very relevant. So we, especially in the regions, we've tried to put our electric buses close to where most people with disabilities usually go. It comes with cameras inside and outside the bus for identifying any kind of incivilization, like problems we may have of robbery, but also for the bus drivers to have a whole view of what's around the bus, so to avoid those blind spots that may induce the driver to go over a pedestrian or a cyclist. So it's interesting that our buses are not just electric buses. Are buses that people love, are much less noisy, that have very little vibration. And for the user, it looks like the government or the country finally invested in my daily trip. And they love the electric buses. One of the passengers told me, this is my little airplane. Probably she has never been in an airplane, but she felt like the electric bus was like an airplane. So I think that electric buses are a great policy in Chile. It has allowed us to invest in improving public transport. And also, even though they're more expensive than a diesel bus, if you look at the lifetime and you consider the much lower operational and maintenance cost, and the lifetime of batteries, which is getting longer and longer, it looks like it's a very good economic player, it is a very great alternative for those that are considering investing in a diesel bus if you consider the long life of the bus. So we're very happy with what we're seeing. Of course, this also requires investing in terminals, and our terminals need to be fed with electricity, and that's also a challenge. And it's nice that we've learned also how to design them better, so that the layout and the number of charging positions per bus or buses per charging position are growing according to our experience. And it's beautiful to see that most of the experience has been made with the traditional operators. So here you have those very old style bus operators, which probably his father and his grandfather used to work on the same particular activity in the same piece of land, and now they feel that they have made a huge leap in terms of quality of service and in terms of pride, how proud they feel about what they're offering. So this is a very nice story. Also, it has come with bringing women into driving. And that's also an element that has been very welcome, not only by the passengers, but also by those women that now can find a job, formal job with good salary, close to where probably they live, because the terminals are in the periphery of the cities. So it has been a marvelous public policy to involve women into driving.
I think that's a great summary for many initiatives around electrification of the buses. And when I look at Chile's commitment to carbon neutrality, it reminds me of an old saying: the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, the second best time is now. It seems like Chile is planting a whole forest of sustainable initiatives nowadays.
Yeah, we understand that this is urgent, but I like to say that sometimes when you go to the doctor, to the physician, he'll tell you have to take this medicine, and this is urgent, because either you take it or you'll die, or you will get very ill. And the medicine is terrible, but you have to take it. In this case, the medicine is great. In this case, turning your traditional diesel buses into electric buses, it's really great for level of service. It's still really great in terms of number of people attracted to using public transport daily. It's great in terms of environmental pollution. It's great in many dimensions. And that's why I think that we should understand this as a fantastic opportunity to make our cities better and reach our decarbonization goals. It's a super opportunity that it has. In the case of Chile, it has taken 3 governments. So 2 governments ago, they brought the first 2 buses to test them and to learn. And many people said, why are we doing this? Shouldn't we wait when the developed world, tries them? And then maybe we can think of changing our buses into electric. They're so expensive. We will never have them. And then the next government realized that it was a great opportunity and requested in the bidding process to buy hundreds of buses. And then we have continued the policy so that now has become also another symbol of the great quality public transport system we have in Santiago. Not only the trains of the metro, the buses, the fare integration. In Santiago, you can hop between buses and trains with a single fare. And that allows people to take the most out of what the public transport system can offer. We also have, of course, payment is by digital cards or QR codes. And we have a maximum monthly fare in which when you reach around 45 trips per month, every extra trip is for free. So the frequent users feel like also that they are being rewarded because they use public transport very frequently. And we have an app also that allows us to learn, or not only to plan our trips, but also to know when the next bus will reach our bus stop. And this is also in many of our bus stops too. My morning trip was in a great bus stop. I knew that the next bus will be the 429 I used this morning was going to arrive, let's say 5 to 1 minute, and then it came.
And as Minister, we were talking about the buses a lot, and globally over 80% of public transport trips are taken on buses in the world. It's a very important mode of public transport, and Chile has led in modernizing its buses. But I want to also hear from you, how do you see the role of governance and funding on sustaining these improvements for the future of buses in Chile?
Well, it's key. It's really key on on one hand, what people really want is not really a bus. They want service. They want frequencies. They want hours in which you can rely that the bus will come. They want headway regularity. They want buses that reach areas of the city where you want to go. So it's very important that the governments request the service that is needed. We have many cities in Chile that still we don't have that regulatory framework. And sometimes the buses around 6 p.m., some of them decide that it's good enough for the day and they go home. And for the user, that's a system that is not good, that you cannot rely on. So the first dimension we need to work on is to provide a regulatory framework in which bus providers, public transport providers offer the public transport service that people need. And I think that in that sense, the authorities should not only request and force the providers to commit to certain attributes of the public transport system, but also provide some sort of coordination between services so that each of them are part of an orchestra. We don't want to have many different beautiful, a guitar, a drum, a bass, a violin playing music by their own. We really want the city to offer a play that people can enjoy. And to achieve that, all our transport services need to be part of a plan so that a user can really, that everything that is in the city, they can take advantage and use them so that their trip is more as convenient as possible. And hopefully with a fare that they can afford. So totally, I completely think, I have no doubt that if somebody tells me that the problem with public transport service is that the government should be taken out of the question and allow private operators to provide their service, I don't think that they are understanding the complexity of providing a good quality public transport system. And I also think that private operators have a great role in terms of providing the service that the authorities require. And also in terms of finance, I think there's also a role of the government, because for many of these private operators, getting the funds to invest into a much better electric bus that will have a long life and they will have a smaller maintenance and operation cost, but they need to pay more on day one, that sometimes is something that they cannot afford. So I think that the government should step up and provide those loans, provide those guarantees that the operators require to get the funding for them to make the investment in the electro terminals and the buses so that we can all achieve the immense economic and public transport service benefits coming from electric buses.
I think sound regulatory framework and resilient governance became more important after COVID-19 particularly. And what you say, I fully agree. This is what we see all around the world as a trend now, Mr. Minister. And I was reading some months ago some conference notes, and I saw one of your statements in one of the conferences you were speaking. You said that mobility doesn't end with mobility. It must be the means to integrate into a sustainable city. So I think this is explaining all your approach to the sustainability, equity, and improved quality of life in our cities.
Sure. I think that and here, let me go one step behind. We have the goal now to reduce carbon emissions. And I think we jump into electromobility too fast. It looks like it would be the only way of achieving carbon neutrality would be to turn all our fleet, the fleet outside of your window in the city, turn them into electric, and that's it. And I think that would be a mistake in terms of a missed opportunity. And to convince you, let me introduce you to my 5-term formula. So let me conceptualize the emissions of a city, the carbon emission in a year. How many tons of CO2 or of greenhouse emissions we emit per year in a city? And it's going to be the multiplication of 5 factors, multiplication. So one of them is zero, the whole thing is zero. One of them gets doubled, the whole thing gets doubled. 1, number of people in the city. So the more people in the city, more emissions you'll get. 2nd, how many trips each of these people make in a year? If we make more trips, we will be making more emissions. We will be emitting more. And I think telecommuting was one of the nice things about our COVID pandemic, which has allowed us to, now we have this kind of conversation in which you're interviewing me with vision, and I don't have to go where you are. So it allows us to reach our goals without having to travel every time. So number of people, number of trips. 3rd, how many kilometers per trip? So if we can make our trips shorter, instead of a 10-kilometer trip, make it a 5-kilometer trip or a 3-kilometer trip, immediately your emissions go down. And that's an amazing opportunity, not only to decarbonizing, but also to making our life better. Who would like to have a 20-kilometer trip if they can do it in 3? And if you turn your 20-kilometer trip that you probably take by car into a 3-kilometer trip, maybe you can go biking. Maybe some people may go walking. Some people may say, well, now the bus may be an alternative. So notice how, by making your trip shorter, public transport and sustainable transport modes get more appealing. Number 4 is how much energy do you need per kilometer? And of course, a big truck is different than a small car, is different than a bus where you share the space with many others, and or different than a bike. So per capita, how much energy do we need to travel each kilometer? And this is one of the main reasons why we say we should foster public transport, we should promote bikes or walking, because the energy we need to travel those kilometers is shorter. And finally, we have the electromobility. How many emissions per unit of energy? And then, of course, electromobility gets great because it allows us to get those energy, either a bus, either a bike, or either a car with zero emissions. And it's interesting, as I said before, that when we move into zero emissions energy sources, public transport gets more attractive because people prefer to travel in an electric bus than in a diesel bus. So my main goal here with my formula is to invite people to get away from the idea that everything is solved with electromobility, and instead to think on how we can make our cities better by having them with less trips, shorter trips, more efficient public transport systems, which will allow you not only to turn your fleet into zero emissions, but also at the same time make your city a better city to live. And that's something we should have in mind. I love, for instance, the provocation of Mayor Hidalgo in Paris, who's saying, I would like to turn Paris into a 15-minute city. Of course, it's a provocation, but I think this is the right provocation. If we can take our cities into cities where we can reach the destinations of our trips, those activities we need to get, like work, study, or commerce, or tourism, near where we are, then the whole equation gets down and our life gets much better.
I think certainly what you explain now, especially from the perspective of the greenhouse gas emissions, it brings me to the formula of avoid, shift, and improve approach, certainly in the transportation. And then certainly this is also the basis, if we, from the transport perspective, for the 15-minute cities. And I would like to link this with the BRT, because BRT systems were seen as the main actor for the shift to the public transport, particularly in Latin America during the last 50 years. We are this year celebrating the 50 years anniversary of the BRT in Curitiba. So it's also good. And then you authored a book about this one, about BRT systems in the world. But my question is to you, how do you envision the future of BRT globally? This is not a particular question for Chile, but as an expert on the transportation, I also wonder, how do you see the future of BRT systems in the world? Because I don't think that we have the same level of phase in the BRT implementation last 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I think Bus Rapid Transit is a great player in the public transport arena. Among the set of tools we have, we need to be careful, because what is BRT? BRT is how can we get our buses to avoid getting stuck in traffic and have instead lane in our roads where they can move faster. That's it. And of course, there's
increase
different
commercial
types.
speed.
Sorry?
Increase the commercial speed of the buses.
Exactly, because if you increase the commercial speed, then of course, not only the level of service gets improved, because people will arrive earlier to their destination, and therefore people will be more satisfied and will prefer that kind of service, but also it increases the productivity of your fleet. So if you have, let's say, a 10 kilometer per hour cycle of a bus, and you can turn it into a 20 kilometers per hour cycle, the same set of buses now will allow you to give twice the frequency, because the cycle has dropped by half, and therefore your same buses will be doing twice as many cycles per day. So it allows you to reduce the cost, and at the same time, since you're giving more frequency, it reduces the waiting time of your passengers. So really, the average speed of public transport is the key driver to improve level of service and sustainability of the whole system. And that's why BRT makes so much sense. And that's why the metros are so great, because they have a track where they don't get any kind of interference. And worldwide, we have taken this idea of Jaime Lerner there in Curitiba 50 years ago, built it in our cities with different flavors, with different formats. And I think all of them are in some way, as long as they're effective in reducing cycle times, they are helping the public transport system to be more sustainable, provide better quality of service, and be more cost effective. So that gross idea, I think, is something that we need to promote. Also, buses have the benefit of being very flexible. If you have, for instance, in our metro, if we have one metro that has a technical problem, well, that's a problem for the whole line. Your whole line will be stopped because one metro, for instance, if somebody jumps into the tracks, which sometimes happen in our city, well, the whole line has to be stopped for a while until you really can have your trains operating again. And that doesn't happen with buses. And the other good thing that happens with buses is that they can get not only in the main avenues, but also eventually go out of the avenues and go into the local communities, in the local neighborhoods, providing a direct trip. So I think that the BRT is a great player for a city, as long as it is designed correctly. And it can be a great complement also for our underground systems, which are also fantastic. So instead of creating some sort of battle between metro and BRTs, I think we should both. We should make every effort to invest in better public transport system, and if that is increasing the extension of metro networks, that's fantastic. If you can improve the quality of service and the speed of the buses by providing them with a bus corridor, that's also great.
I fully agree with you. Sometimes people are asking me whether BRT or metro, which one is better. And I tell them that this question is like asking to a technician whether the screwdriver is better or hammer is better. They have sometimes different functions, they have different capacity. So you have different budget, you have different timelines. So they are all the kids of the sustainable mobility family. This is how I see it, and they are all perfect for the needs and requirements and parameters of the cities.
Yeah, and sometimes we, as you mentioned, I am a specialist in public transport. That has been my whole career. And sometimes you meet with authorities that may have a strong bias towards one or the other. And I think in those cases, what we need to do is to argue and build on the public transport system that their authorities want. At the end, what we want is to make progress. At the end, what we want is to have better cities. And all of our cities require having those kind of transport modes that make public transport more appealing. And by doing that, we will be contributing to a better city.
And Minister Muñoz, I also see that Chile has implemented significant measures to tackle fare evasion in public transport. We already see some reductions. What were the most effective strategies in achieving this, and what kind of lessons other countries, cities can learn from your experience?
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you raised this point, because in our great public transport system we have in Santiago, if there's a black spot, it's fare evasion. I think that fare evasion is something that we authorities should do everything in our hands to fight it, not only because of the funds that the system will not be raising, which are relevant, but also, and very important, because I think that by allowing people to evade their fares, it creates a culture in which people may consider that it's acceptable to not pay a public service and enjoy from it. And that's something that is deeply wrong, especially because this is what people do. Sometimes the first thing they do in the morning, they go out from their houses and get a public service, which is their bus or their metro. And if they don't pay their fares, the first thing they do in the morning, I don't want to know what they do the rest of the day. So what we've done is to understand this challenge as a multidimensional challenge. I don't think there's a silver bullet to address it. I think it has to be addressed from different angles. In Santiago, we have 12,000 bus stops. And our fare evasion is distributed all around the city, which at some point it has reached like 45% of the bus rides, which is very high. Now it's 38, and we want to go down. But I think it still is very high. So one thing we're doing is to identify those bus stops where more people board the bus and try to build some sort of area where people must pay their fares digitally to enter that area. So when the bus arrives, everyone has already paid their fares. We call those zonas pagas, like paid zone. A second element that we have done, which I don't like that much, is to add turnstiles in the buses. I would love to have buses without turnstiles, but they have proved to reduce fare evasion, and we have decided to go ahead with them.
How is the impact of turnstiles on the buses for the boarding and alignment time?
In some bus stops, in others it's nothing. In some bus stops it adds some extra time, and of course, not only that. I think the most important thing is that for some people coming with kids, coming with bugs, people that have a large body, feel that entering the bus becomes a little bit of a nightmare, and that's exactly the opposite of what you want to achieve. So
Totally.
it's not something that I would love, because doesn't affect everyone in the same way, but we have decided to move ahead, and no matter what. We have also added, which is nice, and have been so far but apparently it's working well, a second device to pay the fare in the back door, in 600, like 10% of our fleets. And when we analyze the number of paid trips in those buses compared to similar buses, we see that they capture more paid trips than the comparison. So we're very happy to see that this is getting the right impact. This is kind of the most effective thing, incentives for the operators to shut the back door, when people stop alighting the bus. So if people stopped alighting the bus, you should close the door immediately. And that has a very important impact in terms of reducing fare evasion. We have also added more mechanisms to pay, not only your digital card, but also the QR code, so that people that want to pay have more alternatives to pay. We understand that among fare evaders, some of them really want to pay, but sometimes we make it a little bit difficult for them to pay. So it's good for us to give more alternatives. Some of our fare evaders also are people that are coming from a different transport mode, so they have already paid their fare. And sometimes they feel that there's no reason to tap their card if it's going to charge them for zero. So they don't see any problem at all of just entering the bus and that's it. So some of our fare evaders are really people that already paid. So that is our jungle of fare evasion. Some people are getting out of their houses, understanding that they will not pay the fare never again, and they understand it almost as a right that they have got to move around. So one of the most important elements here is also to enforce payment by having people entering into the buses and asking people to show evidence that they have already paid the fare. And we are trying to strengthen our capacities to do so by adding more and more of our inspectors into the buses. But of course, one problem we have is that they have to do this accompanied by a policeman, and our policemen have many other responsibilities in the city, and therefore sometimes it's hard for us to get the policeman or policewoman that we need to go and fight for fare evasion inside the buses. But we do anyway, daily, and that it's a battle where we're committed to win, but it's very difficult. Interestingly, and I think that this is an important lesson, one of the main mistakes, I think, of our public transport system was in some way to decouple the responsibility of the driver regarding requesting payment for people that board the bus. Mm-hmm. And this is something that we did at the very beginning. Furthermore, for the pandemia, we decided to allow, because we were worried about contagious between passengers, we allow buses to open the back door and allow people to enter there. And of course, those are very gross, both are, I think, are mistakes that we are avoiding everywhere else in the country. The idea that the driver should have, I think, some part of the salary associated to the demand that captures, not whole, not full, but some little, and keep the pride in some way that the driver is also in charge of the bus and in charge of making everyone pay. I think this is something that I would recommend not to lose.
Mr. Muñoz, thank you so much for sharing this great insights. Actually, I was also myself taking a lot of notes. I learned a lot during this interview. Before we conclude, are there any other advices or any other points you would like to share with our listeners?
No, we're very happy in Santiago with the public transport system we have. Our main challenge is to get this quality elsewhere in the country. We're also very proud that the International Transport Forum, this OECD agency that gathers transport ministers has elected Chile as the president of the ITF for this year. And we take that with a lot of responsibility. And we're trying to move ahead decarbonization of the transport sector, traffic safety, in artificial intelligence as the main topics that we think are going to be key for the coming years in terms of improvements for our transport sector. We are happy also to work with other countries to gather and to share some of our experiences so that other cities can learn from the road that we have walked. It has not been free of problems. We have failed many times in this path, but by the end, we look back and we realize that we have made great decisions. And I think that one of the most important ones is the one of having a fair integration of both transport modes so that at the end, people can move within a city by choosing the combination of services that will fit them the most. We didn't talk about bicycles, which are also very relevant in intermodality. We think that bicycles should be playing a great role. We are allowing our bicycles to enter trains and buses on the Sundays and the days that we have off. And that's really great as a policy. We hope, again, that if you're listening to this podcast, you can come and visit Chile and check all the wonderful things I mentioned about our public transport system.
Thank you so much, Mr. Minister. I also advise all our listeners to go and visit Chile to experience all these developments about public transport in the country. It has been an absolute privilege to have you on the podcast. Your leadership and vision is truly inspiring. That's what I should certainly say. And I want to thank our listeners for tuning into Mobility Redefined. Stay tuned for more conversations with global leaders transforming mobility.
Thank you very much, Kaan.
Thank you for listening to Mobility Redefined, brought to you by Modaxo. For more insights, visit our website at mobilityredefined.com or follow us on LinkedIn. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite app to stay updated with our latest episodes. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope you enjoyed the conversation.